Welcome in. It is Big Ten today. It is truly great to have you with us on this Monday. Dave Repson, Rayfeld Davis. Do you realize this week we start February?
It's big time. I was just talking about that last night. We learned a lot this weekend. We learned Wisconsin could be a Final Four team. I go out on a limb and say this could be a better Wisconsin team than that Final Four team with Frank Kaminsky, Sam Decker.
Whoa.
I believe so. Shout out to Josh
Really?
Gasser. He believes so, too. You look at Maryland, I think Maryland can really make a push into the top four in the Big Ten to get that double bye in the tournament, although they had a terrible non-conference. And I finally can say it. I just do not understand the net. You look at Northwestern being at 61 and the teams ahead of them, Northwestern should be in the top 25. You look at their strength of record, it's big time. I'm really rooting for my Wildcats.
All right, let's get into our big story, and it is the weekend that was. It includes Rayfeld's Wildcats. They're 15-5, their second best start through 20 games in program history. Another school that Rayfeld has at least some ties to, Purdue. Zach Edey went over 2,000 career points. Boilers survived a bit of a second-half scare in Jersey. Wisconsin, who we were talking about, they sweep MSU. And Minnesota, what about the Gophers rallying from 16 down to win at Penn State? They halted a 4-game skid. I do want to start with Purdue, and I just think, like, you go into this game at Rutgers, and look, I think Rutgers is going to be fabulous here going forward. I still think they're going to beat a number of people at Jersey Mike's Arena this year. I'm not writing off this year at all, but obviously there's so much excitement over next season and the incredible recruiting class they have coming in. But you looked at, okay, Rutgers beaten Purdue 4 straight years.
Right.
Surely Purdue's not going to let it happen this time, right? And there was a few minutes there in the second half we're kind of thinking, man, it may happen. And give a ton of credit to Rutgers. They really played well defensively. I would say, though, there's a lot to nitpick with Purdue. It was not a great performance. Let's start with Purdue's side. What did you take away from what we saw?
Yeah, going into this game, Purdue has some added motivation because you look at Zach Edey and that senior class, they never won at the RAC. They never won at Jersey Mike's Arena. So going throughout their career, they won at every single arena in the Big Ten except that one. So that was the one they had to go out there and get. But the thing I took away most, outside of the victory, you go on the road, you turn it over 15 times, you go 5 of 17 from 3, but you find a way to win the game, and that's big time. On the road in the Big Ten, Brandon Smith made big plays. Zach Edey was Zach Edey. I thought Lance Jones played a tremendous floor game. He was terrible on the offensive end, shooting the ball, but he did everything else. Coach would always say, how can you stay on the floor if you're not making shots? And Lance showed it last night. 10 big rebounds, 8 assists on the offensive end, 5 key steals in moments where Purdue really needed them, turning them into baskets.
Right.
And then on the glass, that's where I would nitpick Purdue. Purdue got beat on the glass by 4, but it just wasn't how they got beat on the glass. It was Rutgers getting 15 offensive rebounds, 15 second chance points, because you go up against a good team in the NCAA tournament, a team that's physical, that's bigger than you, that's tougher than you. And if you give them 15 second chances, 15 second cracks to score the ball, you're not going to win most of those games. So I think if it's one thing to nitpick, it's definitely that area.
And when you head into a game against Rutgers, you kind of say, hey, how are they going to beat us?
Yep.
Like, what do we need to prevent them from doing?
Yep.
They're going to turn you over.
Yep.
That's one thing they do really well, right? They're not great in a half-court offensive setting.
Yep.
But if they can turn turnovers into points pretty quickly. And then the other thing is, to your point, they're really physical. They're good on the inside. And it felt like in both of those areas, Purdue was a little deficient. I mean, turned the ball over quite a bit.
Yep.
And like kind of the formula for beating Purdue, as we've seen, is, Edey's going to get what Edey's going to get. Can you prevent them from hitting a lot of threes?
Yep.
And they were able to do that. And then can you turn over their guards? And they were able to do that too. But I'm with you 100%. Like, you win on the road in the Big Ten, particularly in an environment like that, which I think is one of the best environments, not just in the Big Ten, but one of the toughest places to play in the country. It's a feather in your cap. Mm-hmm. I think it's a game that Rutgers can build on, too. I think you come away from that game and you say, hey, we fought them tooth and nail. We did a lot of things really well. Again, they have their offensive limitations. I think they understand that. Yep. But I think there was a lot of real positive from their point of view.
Yeah, you look at Rutgers in that second half, they shot at 50% from the field. They go 4 of 8 from the three-point line. The ball is moving around. Cliff Amori is good inside. Andre Hyatt starts to score the ball from the perimeter. You got some productivity from Derek Simpson. Rutgers played their best half of basketball, in my opinion, in that second half. Purdue just ended up getting to the free throw line 25 times and made 19 of them. Rutgers didn't get to the free throw line at that rate. They didn't convert at that rate either. That was a difference in the game. You lose by 8. Purdue gets 10 more free throws. That's a difference in the game because you can dominate a Purdue team on the glass with their front line. You look at Trey Kaufman-Wren, Mason Gillis. Kayla First didn't play much, but that's a good four-man. That's a good, tough front line, and they only get 2 rebounds. So that's really encouraging for the Rutgers front line to show that I can dominate these guys. If our guards come to play like they did in that second half, we can start cooking.
I will say this, Raphael, that Rutgers has only won 2 conference games shows you how good the Big Ten is top to bottom because that is a tough team to knock out.
Yep.
Okay, that was the last game of the weekend. The first game of the weekend was Wisconsin Friday against Michigan State. And look, it's in Madison. We know how tough it is to win on the road. But Michigan State really never felt like they had a chance in this game. They literally never led in the game. So Wisconsin led from start to finish. And to a certain extent, I feel like we're sounding like a broken record. But, man, Wisconsin is good offensively. I mean, getting to the point where you can almost say they're elite offensively. And I just don't think we've seen this. And maybe that's what you're getting at with the comparisons to that Final Four team, although I would remind you that Final Four team was #1 in the nation in offensive efficiency. So, you know, they've had teams with great offensive weapons. That was one of them. But this team is really complete.
One thing about this team that I would say is different from that team will be they have 5 guys on the floor offensively that can beat you every single possession. They don't have a guy on the offensive end this season where you can hide a guy on. You try and hide a guy on Max Klesmit, you've seen him get 20 and a half, 19 straight. AJ Storr feels like he has a vendetta against Michigan State. 28 points on 9 of 17. He got to the free throw line. He was making threes. He was big time. He's a piece that team didn't have at that moment. No, you had Frank Kaminsky and Sam Decker, but Sam Decker didn't really play off the bounce. He was an athlete. He was a slasher. He could make an open shot. But when it comes to end of the shot clock, when you needed something, when Tyler Wall is struggling, only 6 points, Chucky Hepburn only had 4 points, you need a guy that can have the ball in his hand, that can go make plays, and that can go get you 30. They have that guy. And then off the bench, you think of John Blackwell. They didn't have a guy on that team off the bench at the guard position. Once Jackson got hurt and Bronson Koenig started to start the game, Bronson was playing 30 minutes of contest. They didn't have a guy off the bench that was a defender at this level that could score the ball offensively. I think that's an advantage there, a little more athletic at the guard positions. But then the guy, Stephen Crow. When other guys don't show up, they have guys that are going to show up every time. Stephen Crow, 15 points, 7 rebounds, but he's going to get you assists every single game. Now they have multiple guys that can beat you. I understand Frank Kaminsky was awesome, but AJ Storr fills that scoring role. Tyler Wall is that Swiss Army knife at that 4 position. And then they have the guard play. Chucky Hepburn, his scoring is down, but like Coach Gard said, winning is up. And when you have that quintessential point guard that just cares about setting the table, doesn't care about his score or his numbers, just cares about winning, that takes you to the next level because they're not going to beat themselves.
And the other thing I'd say about Hepburn is he took Tyson Walker out of his game.
Man,
on the defensive end. I mean, he was great. And when you don't have as much pressure on you on the offensive end of the court, right? Like last year, you think about where they were, end of shot clock, end of game, it always seemed to come down to Chucky trying to make a play there. He doesn't have to do that this year because you have other guys who can make plays. So as you say, he can set the table, but he can also exert himself on the defensive end. Michigan State, I'm not pushing any kind of panic button. We've talked a lot about the Ken Pom and you know, they're favored to win 10 of their next 11 games. I think it was disappointing they didn't put up more of a fight where you didn't feel like, I don't want to imply they didn't put up a fight like they weren't putting out maximum effort. I'm just saying I never thought they had a chance to win.
Right. When I think of Tom Izzo Michigan State teams, the first thing I think of is toughness. It's always toughness. It's a fight to them. They're going to fight you tooth and nail until the end. You go on a road to Wisconsin, you get out rebounded by 10, you get beat in the paint by 6. That's not Michigan State basketball. Michigan State basketball is defend, run, defend, rebound, and run. And they didn't do that at Wisconsin. They didn't defend. Wisconsin shot 53% from the field. They made 9 threes. They got to the free throw line. Wisconsin only had 6 turnovers. They were comfortable the entire game. Michigan State has got to get back to that grittiness. It can't be pretty basketball at Michigan State. Michigan State basketball is not sexy. They're supposed to beat you up. They're supposed to pound it inside, drive the basketball. They shoot a bunch of jump shots, not just threes, but mid-range floaters. Jaden Akins has the athleticism to not just get to the rim, but go yam it on somebody at the rim.
Right.
Max Klesmit took him out of his game. He got 10 points, but on 10 shots. But the defense from Chucky Hepburn, Max Klesmit in that backcourt, they're going to take a bunch of guards out of games like they did with Tyson Walker and Jaden Akins. But when they do, Michigan State's got to develop that inside presence. It can't just be Malik Hall and his turnaround fadeaway jump shots. It's got to be somebody dunking the basketball on the road to quiet the crowd, someone giving the bench energy. One of those big fellas that got to arrive.
Big week for them. Michigan and Maryland at home. Those are games you really got to win if you're Michigan State. I was in Evanston on Saturday night to the game between Northwestern and Ohio State. It was a 25-point win. And frankly, it wasn't that close. I mean, Ohio State ended the game on a 12-2 run. Northwestern absolutely annihilated them.
Crazy.
And, you know, Chris Collins was telling us at shoot-around, he said, I'm just a little concerned. You're coming off a big emotional win. You beat your rival in Illinois. You exerted a ton of energy doing it. The game went to overtime. Ohio State had an extra day of rest. They had played Tuesday. Northwestern had played Wednesday. I think he just felt like, man, this is the kind of game where you could have a letdown. And they did not. And they didn't have a letdown despite the fact that, you know, Boo Buie and Brooks Barnheiser were not scoring in the first half.
And no, that's leadership in the locker room. I think that speaks to the leadership of Boo Buie, Brooks Barnheiser, Ty Berry, and those older guys. You get that big win. I know those guys celebrated that night. They had a lot of fun that night, but it was back to business the next day. They probably watched some film, got some shots up, and then they went hard on Friday. But that's leadership in the locker room. That's this win will not matter if we lose to Ohio State, so they had to be ready for it. But I think it was big time for Northwestern to win a game, get up big at half without Boo Buie dominating the scoring category. He only scored 4 of his points in that first half, 15 in the second, but they had other guys step up. I'll go back to last season at Rutgers, Brooks Barnheiser. I feel like that was a game he really emerged scoring the ball. He scored the ball well, but it also showed him he could do it. He could do it at this level in the league. And I look at guys like Martinelli and Luke Hunger. For them to go for 23 and 5 as a combination in the Big Ten, that gives them confidence. But it also gives confidence to Boo Buie, to Ty Berry, to where we don't have to force it as much. When we're struggling, we don't have to force it and try to score. Our other guys can keep us in it. And it was big time across the board.
Not a particularly deep team, but to your point, to have 6 players in double figures and 2 of them coming off the bench, it really speaks to kind of, hey, they've got a lot of different guys who can contribute. I thought one thing that was really interesting was Buie wasn't scoring, but he wasn't hunting points. Exactly. He only took 10 shots the whole game. He was 6 of 10. Right? Yes. I mean, they only had 1 player who took a shot in the game who didn't shoot 50% or better. Right? And that was Jordan Clayton, who was 0 of 1. I mean, other than that, every guy shot the ball well. And offensively, they're so much better than they were a year ago. I mean, it's night and day. I understand they're not as good defensively. I do want to talk really quickly about Ohio State. I talked to Chris Holtmann before the game, and he felt like, hey, I don't see this going the way that last year went. I mean, we know where it really spiraled out of control for them. He feels like they have a really good locker room. They're just young. They start 4 sophomores. But, man, this was a poor performance. I mean, this looked like a team that wasn't ready to go for whatever reason. How do you prevent this from getting ugly?
You just got to keep going day by day, keep the guys engaged, keep them understanding that this is the Big Ten and this is tough. You go on a road with young guys. I've been in the Big Ten as a sophomore in this league, obviously. You go to Northwestern and you think you're going to get a win because it's Northwestern. It doesn't matter. They beat Purdue this year. They beat Illinois at home. It's just the brand of the basketball team. And then young guys don't understand it's tough to win everywhere. Because I lost at Northwestern as a sophomore with teams that we maybe felt like we should have won those games. But you get guys like Felix Akpara. He's got to understand to start learning how to play basketball on the offensive end, not just offensive rebounds or tip backs, but they got to have the comfortability to throw him the ball and he'll make a post move, get to his jump hook, because they don't have a post presence, a consistent post presence. Zed Key isn't the same presence inside on the block. He's lost some weight. It looks like he's lost some strength down there. Evan Mahaffey isn't consistent on the offensive end because Roddy Gale and Bruce Thornton, they get you 18 and 15. Jamison Battle didn't come to play offensively either. They got to develop another scoring.
I thought Northwestern did a great job on Jamison Battle. They did not let him kind of catch and in rhythm shoot the ball. He was moving his feet. He was every time he got a shot off, other than the one that he made out of the corner, it felt like he had to work for it. I will say this about Ohio State. They have 5 quad 1 games left. They have opportunities here going forward. That the way the Big Ten is constructed this year, there are some teams that don't have that number of quad 1 games. They do. That's cool. If they can figure out a way to get it going here, I don't think you can give up hope on the Buckeyes, but that was not a good performance on Saturday night. Our big stat is brought to you by Gatorade. Caitlin Clark now 13 points away from tying the Big Ten's all-time scoring record held by Ohio State's Kelsey Mitchell. She had 38 in Iowa's 92-73 win over Nebraska. She's got 3,389 career points. She will have a chance to break that record when the Hawkeyes play next Wednesday at Northwestern. She needs 14 points to do it. I kind of like her chances.
Yeah, I love it.
I don't know. I'm going to go out on a limb. Let's get back to the men's action. Illinois taking on Indiana. This was a surprisingly close game given some of the factors that were working against Indiana, namely that Khalil Ware didn't play in the game, and they didn't hit a single three-pointer the whole game, and yet it's tied at 62 with a minute and a half to go. Brad Underwood said afterwards his team stunk. I think that's overly harsh on Brad's part, and he wins a good win, but I do think it was a little concerning. Terrence Shannon still doesn't seem to be in a flow. I think there were a lot of things that Indiana did really well in this game to remain in the game. Let's take Illinois' side first. Like, what do you take of where they are? Wasn't a great week, losing on the road to Northwestern and then this narrow home win over IU.
If I had to simplify it on the offensive end, it looks like offensively now those guys see Terrence Shannon back in the lineup and they're looking as though our guy is back, give him the ball and get out the way, because they're not playing the same way that they were offensively, even in the loss at Purdue. They had more ball movement, they had more continuity, and when they did go iso ball with Marcus Domask in the post, it was after some movement. Right now, the ball is sticking on one side. Guys are having ill-advised jumpers, ill-advised drives to the basket just to get a shot off. One thing that really concerned me in this game from Illinois offensively is a guy, Quincy Guerrier, who's been balling over the last 6 games. Back to December, he didn't get a shot attempt in this game. He didn't get a field goal attempt. He was 0 for 0. He's their guy offensively at the 4 position. He has a lot of mismatches. He has a lot of weapons offensively to score the ball. They got to find a way to keep everybody involved.
What about IU quickly? I mean, it is a crazy aberration that they didn't make a 3. They are the least reliant on the 3 of any team in the Big Ten, as we know. But defensively, man, they did a job. Like, let's give a little credit here to why Illinois looked to be in a little bit of an offensive rut. I thought Indiana had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, I thought this was Indiana's best game on both ends of the floor outside of making the 3, because they missed 10 free throws. Because they make their free throws, they're in this game even more to an extent. I mean, Malik Renew, 21-7. He was great offensively, throwing the ball down low inside. When he fouled out, they didn't know where to go offensively. Mackenzie and Mbako made some plays down the stretch, but they were plus 16 inside, dominating inside. But you cannot go on the road. You missed 10 free throws, only 8 assists, which means that basketball is sticking. Like you said, they didn't make a 3, and then what killed them at the end of the day, in my opinion, they do not get any production from their bench. Because you can go 0 for 9 from 3, you can't miss 10 free throws, but then your bench can get outscored by 19 and expect to win on the road.
They've got Iowa at home tomorrow. That's about as close to a must-win as they can have. That game's on the Big Ten Network. Maryland, I think they're starting to become the team that we thought they would be. I mean, they didn't just beat Nebraska. They absolutely obliterated them. Their defense
big time
is really something, man.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you look at Julian Reese. Rink Mass is coming off a 34-point performance against Ohio State. Felix Akpara is an athletic defender. He can move his feet. Evan Mahafey's a good defender. But Julian Reese said, watch out, I got this. I mean, he shut Rink Mass down. There was a play. He just took the ball from him like a little kid, went and got fouled on the other end. He was big time in the game, 15 points, 16 rebounds. But Maryland needed to win the game where Jameer Young wasn't the guy. Jameer Young was big, 12 points, 9 rebounds, 6 assists. But their freshmen and their bench guys played better. I've been saying all season long, their freshmen have been fighting the game offensively. But I think their freshmen, you think of Deshaun Harris-Smith, top 30 guy out of high school, Jamie Kaiser, top 75 guy out of high school. This was their best game as a collective. They scored 23 points on 13 shots. They shot it when they were open. They drove when it was there. They moved the basketball when it wasn't. And then they played their tail off on the defensive end. If their freshmen are going to continue to play like this, we know what Jameer Young can do. Julian Reese has been dominant on the road the last 3 games. That's where he struggled to start the season. Dante Scott is playing like a senior should play. Maryland to be pushing right for that top 4 spot.
Their shooting was so bad earlier in the year, and Kaiser came in with a reputation as a really good shooter, and you've started to see it here. You certainly saw it in this one, and then their interior defense on Nebraska. Nebraska still made their threes. I mean, this is a really good outside shooting team, but 7 of 22 from 2-point range for them. We know they've struggled away from home, absent the game against Kansas State. That continued in that one. What about Minnesota? They had lost 4 straight. They're down 18 in the second half on the road against Penn State, and you kind of had the sense of, man, this thing's slipping away. And they've been such a nice story because they're so much better than they were a year ago. And the resolve they showed in that second half, not just to win. I mean, it was still in doubt here in the last minute or two, but to kind of pull away at the end. I mean, it really shows what this team is made of. And, man, when they get going, I mean, they are a tough team inside.
They scored 52 points in the half on the road and shot 58% while doing it. And in that second half, Minnesota decided that we were a bigger, more physical team. They got out-rebounded in the first half, and then they were plus 10 on the glass in that second half. Dawson Garcia is 6'11", 250, 60 pounds maybe. He's got to get down low. He stands around the perimeter a lot in that first half. I don't know what they said to him in the second half, but he started to dominate inside. And then we talk a lot of talk about Owen Freeman, John Blackwell. But Cam Christie was big time. The brother of Max Christie, he had 15 of his 19 in the second half to go along with 7 rebounds and 5 assists. If he's going to bring it this way at this level, if Dawson Garcia is going to play aggressive inside like he did in that second half, you know what Elijah Hawkins can do. Mike Mitchell can make shots. This Minnesota can do some things, but I think they can't get down to 18.5 again.
No, that's it's not a great formula. I mean, Ben Johnson has talked a lot about, hey, we're a really good second half team. I mean, a little bit better first half team. You know what? They got a week off here to get ready for Northwestern. And you think about the difference. I mean, you tell me, but to me, like the difference of getting ready for that game, coming off a great road win versus we've lost 5 in a row. I mean, I got to think that's night and day. Tough one for Penn State, no doubt. They've lost 4 of 5. And the only win in there was against Wisconsin. So if you'd like to try to make sense of that, I invite you to do it. Iowa back to its winning ways after losing a couple. Peyton Sandfort, Tony Perkins were just great against Michigan. Remember, they had lost to Michigan in Iowa City. So you avenge a defeat that was maybe a little bit of a head scratcher, and you do it in emphatic fashion.
And this is coming off a loss at the last second to Maryland. And how do you respond? You need your veterans, your older guys, your seniors to make plays on the road, especially at the guard position. Peyton Sandfort, Tony Perkins, they were outstanding in the game against Michigan. They combined for 50 points on 19 of 26 from the field. Tony Perkins has been really good since Coach McCaffrey put the ball in his hands at the point guard position, allowing him to set the table for others. He has a lot of space with multiple shooters on the floor. But I love Peyton Sandfort. After that Maryland game, Peyton Sandfort went to that press conference and said it was my fault. I should have made Jameer Young go right. I should be able to get that stop at the end of the game. I put it on me. He only scored 6 points in that game, but to go out, go on the road, to have a redemption game like this at Michigan, 26 points, 21 of them coming in the second half, that's how your leaders have to respond in the Big Ten.
Yeah, it was really refreshing to see a player who was so hard on himself and maybe unduly hard on himself. I mean, look, Jameer Young's a hard guy to stop, particularly late in games. Like, join the club of people who struggle to stop Jameer Young late in games because, as we've outlined, he is, by some measures, the most clutch player in America. But to respond in the way that Peyton Sandfort did is pretty remarkable. Meanwhile, Michigan, it's really getting ugly. I mean, they've lost 8 of 9. You got Michigan State now coming up on the road, so that it's not going to be easy. It's a challenging time, no doubt. Michigan made it official Saturday morning, naming Sherrone Moore as its new head football coach. He, of course, replaces Jim Harbaugh, who left for the LA Chargers after leading the Wolverines to the national championship. Moore has spent the last 6 years on Harbaugh's offensive staff, most recently the OC and offensive line coach, filled in on 4 of their wins as head coach this year. He explained his philosophy at Saturday's introductory news conference.
We're going to operate this thing from now on in 3 phases: the process, the pursuit, the standard. We've already started the process. We continue to talk about the process over the prize, and the prize we got. But we're hungry for more. Now we're in the pursuit of greatness. And to do that, you got to push, you got to strain, you got to do that every single day, on and off the field, to be great. And that'll take you to the standard. And once we continue to win on and off the field, we'll become the standard. And that's the goal here at the University of Michigan, and nothing less.
For more on this story now, we're joined by Sam Webb, who runs the Michigan Insider for 247 Sports. He joins us now. Sam, let's start with what we just heard from Sherrone Moore on Saturday. What stood out to you about what he had to say?
You know, it was very, I think, indicative of his readiness as a coach. You just don't expect for a 37-year-old to be ready for the magnitude of the moment, right? I think that's the concern that maybe a lot of fans would have for a first-time guy. But he has just been grizzled in ways that I don't know, Dave, that you see a lot of 37-year-olds be grizzled. I mean, he made a successful transition from Central Michigan to Michigan in 2018, going from mid-major to high major. He goes from, tight ends coach to offensive line coach at a time where, remember, in 2020, Jim Harbaugh made dramatic changes to his staff. And maybe after defensive coordinator, the most dramatic was moving on from Ed Warner, who was a seasoned offensive line coach, to a guy who had never coached the position in Sherrone Moore, and who coached it at a Joe Moore award-winning level. So that was another challenge met. Then he goes from O-line coach to OC, another challenge met, right? Sole play caller, another challenge met. And then this season, especially at the end of the season, when he's charged with navigating Michigan through the most treacherous of waters during the regular season at Penn State, against Maryland when your quarterback can't put weight on his front leg, against Ohio State, he made winning decisions in those games. And so what I saw on Saturday was a guy who has that kind of depth, who has that kind of readiness. And I think that the magnitude of the moment just isn't too much for him. And that, to me, was what kind of came across.
And this kind of dovetails a little bit with that, Sam, but just kind of getting into his background a little bit. As you mentioned, he came 6 years ago. He has no connections to the University of Michigan at all. So part of it is, I think, what you just went through, kind of some of the X and O acumen, first of all, and just the notion that he has proven that he can do it at this level because he's been put in an unusual spot. But over the course of time here, kind of backing up to the 6 years ago when he first came and taking us through all of his time at Michigan, it was clear that he was the choice of the players. It was clear that he was the choice of Jim Harbaugh. So kind of what has happened along the way to make this a no-brainer when 6 years ago Sherrone Moore gets the job with no connections at all to the program? I think a lot of people said who, and now all of a sudden here he is as the successor to Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. You got to remember the circumstances in 2020. The offense that we've seen post 2020 is not the same offense that we saw before that. There are a lot of the same plays and concepts, sure, but the DNA, the demeanor of the offense is different. And that is based largely upon the demeanor of the offensive line. They changed, man. They became more physical. Offense became an attitude. And it was much more of a throwback. And you got to credit Jim Harbaugh with this. This is how he wanted it, but someone had to implement it. And Sherrone was able to go in that offensive line room, get with a bunch of guys, some of whom hadn't really been reached by the other offensive line, by Ed Warner, frankly, and to bring a side out of them that hadn't been seen before. So no one was talking about Michigan's running game to the degree that they talk about it now. No one was talking about Michigan's running game like that before Sherrone Moore took over in 2021. So he has a huge role to play in that. And then I think you've also seen how he's adapted. So many coaches, as they get into a bigger role, have ideas about what they want to do. And when things happen and on the run to that, they don't know how to adjust. And Sherrone Moore does. I've talked before about having this conversation with Josh Gaddis when he made a transition about how he had all these ideas about how he was going to run the offense and what it was going to look like. And when you're drawing up plays and concepts that look good on paper, they even look good on the field. You actually see them open on tape, but your players can't hit them. What do you do? And a lot of coaches kind of just say it's all the players and it's not my scheme, and they stay in that rut. Whereas other coaches, the veteran coaches, say, okay, I got to figure out what they can do and adapt to that. And Sherrone has learned that lesson already. Penn State's a perfect example, Dave. You saw the game. They couldn't block those guys, and he made a game-changing decision, game plan-wise, in the first quarter. These are the kinds of things that you've seen in his development at Michigan that, again, like I say, make him ready for this moment.
Yes, if you're struggling to protect the passer, running the ball on literally every down is a good response. And that, of course, is what they did in that Penn State game. I'm curious, just kind of personality-wise, and maybe more broadly speaking, the personality of the program here. So I think this is a challenging spot for Sherrone, and I've been incredibly impressed by him. We spent a ton of time with him, particularly during the playoff run this year. But this is a rough spot to be in. Like, what's the balancing act between being your own guy and continuing what has been wildly successful? I mean, you won the national championship. So what's the balancing act there for continuing what Harbaugh had done, but kind of planting his own flag into this is who I am and this is my identity and my program?
It's a terrific question, and it's so terrific that I think Sherrone has asked that question of himself. You have to. When you follow any field, and someone who comes after Dave Remsen, they're going to be like, "Oh man, how do I step in these shoes?" Right?
Stop it.
You know, you gotta think about, how do I bring me to this when Jim has established a track, or Dave has established a track record for success. You got to figure out a way to be you in that space. You don't come in and change everything. And this is the part about maintaining the culture. So much of what they are is Sherrone already. That's the great fortune. That's the difference between a Rich Rodriguez coming in, who is there's no carryover. There's nothing about what they were that he brings to the table. That's not true with Sherrone. A lot of what they were, he has already. But you gotta be mindful of not trying to be who he was, not trying to be who Harbaugh was. There are going to be some differences in how you do things. For instance, I think one of the biggest differences is going to be how they attack recruiting. I think the amount of resources that Sherrone throws in the recruiting room and throws on the recruiting trail is going to be different. That doesn't mean it was bad before or that Jim didn't do a good job. Obviously, he did with scouting and whatnot. But I think they're going to spray the recruiting area, if you will. They're going to be all over the place. I think there are going to be more staff members allocated to recruiting. That is going to be one of the differences. So you got to be, because that's who Sherrone is. Sherrone is a recruiter. Sherrone is the guy who went and got Dax Hill out of Oklahoma. And when Alabama flips him, doesn't panic. He flips him back from Alabama at a time when Michigan wasn't winning and Bama was. He's that guy. So you want to bring that to the equation. And then I think he also is a guy, when it comes to his assistants, I think he believes a lot in a guy like Kirk Campbell. I think there are some concepts that they're going to bring to the table from a past perspective that maybe weren't at play, as much of them anyway, weren't as at play as they're going to be with Sherrone. So be you. At the end of the day, I think that's the key. Be your authentic self. The worst thing you can be with these guys is fake, because players can spot that in a minute.
You mentioned staff here, Sam. What can you tell us about the Harbaugh staff members and who might go with him and who Sherrone might be able to convince to stay?
Yeah, you talk about the challenge. This is the biggest challenge.
Right.
You are who you hire as a coach. I mean, I think it's the biggest thing. It's what changed the course of events. The trajectory of Jim Harbaugh's tenure at Michigan was changed dramatically by the sweeping staff changes he made in 2020. So this is vitally important. And unfortunately for Sherrone, he just lost two big cogs in the wheel. As I reported over the weekend, players have already heard from Jesse Minter that he's going to be heading out west with Jim. And then news got to the players this morning in a very emotional exchange that Ben Herbert, the strength coach, one of the pillars of the culture that Michigan has, that he's going to be departing as well, heading out west with Jim. And I think the Jesse piece was expected, Dave. You knew he was going to go. I think he probably would have gone to the NFL even if Jim had come back. He's that in demand. But Ben, I think, is a jolt. There was a lot of confidence being expressed inside about the ability to retain him. He just signed a 5-year deal last year to make him the highest paid strength coach in the country at $1 million per year. Sherrone said in his press conference on Saturday he was very confident in his ability to retain him. But by Sunday, I started to hear that it was leaning the other way, that Jim Harbaugh had come in really, really strong and had made an offer that, frankly, was one that blows away what NFL strength coaches make. And so that's one that is going to require some recovery from. I've already heard there that Sherrone is elevating Justin Tress, the assistant strength and conditioning coach, to the head job. And so you're going to maintain some of that room and some of that demeanor and DNA. But you can't sugarcoat this as a big loss. It's a huge loss, and it underscores how important this next week or so is going to be, next week or two is going to be, as Sherrone tries to fill out his staff.
That could be really fascinating to follow that. It could be fascinating to see whether their entrance into the portal, obviously that window opens up when your head coach leaves for 30 days. So still a lot to follow, and I know you will be all over it. Sam Webb, again, from 247 Michigan Insider. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Dave.
Big Ten hockey, Michigan State 5 points clear of Wisconsin. Feels like it's shaping up to be a two-team race. Minnesota and Notre Dame both trailing the Spartans by a double-digit margin at this point. They're followed by Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State. Paul Caponegri's here. We're going to run through the weekend. Let's start with Michigan State and Minnesota. They split the series.
Yep.
An incredible win for Michigan State on Friday, right? You're down 2 goals.
Yeah.
You get 3 goals in the third period, including one literally with seconds left in the game to win. Minnesota won very convincingly on Saturday. Let's start with Michigan State. I mean, they've really been a good story. They split last weekend as well with Michigan.
Yep.
What have we learned about them here in these first couple series back?
Boy, I tell you, I had them the week before those 2 series at Penn State, and they were unbelievable. They went into Pagula and dominated both nights. And you're like, look at this team is by far the #1 team in the Big Ten. The last 2 weekends, they've been kind of up and down. This past week against Minnesota, Minnesota's a better team 5 of the 6 periods.
Right.
I mean, an incredible way to come back. But you're seeing little signs of it's not always going to be perfect, right? And a little adversity, and I think they're handling it well, but you do probably want to see them play a little better because they've had 2 really lopsided losses at Munn. 7-1 to Michigan 2 weeks ago on Friday, and then 5-1 the following night after the big comeback last. Is Trey Augustine, the freshman goalie, is he getting a little tired? I think more mentally than physically. He's an 18-year-old kid, but having the responsibility to be the #1 guy as an 18-year-old, can that wear on you? And playing these really good teams, Minnesota and Michigan, they're not up there right now as you saw in the standings, but they're trending the right way.
Right.
So difficult stuff. But Michigan State's kind of treading water a little now, but they're playing these difficult schedule. And I still think they're going to be there, but it's kind of like it's not going to be as smooth sailing as when I saw 2 weeks ago. I'm like, wow, this team is unstoppable.
It's still pretty interesting to think, I mean, like how far they've come, right? I mean, they had a 16-game winless streak against Minnesota. Yeah. They end that. They haven't won I don't need to tell you this,
the
but
big, regular
never
season
won the Big
or,
Ten, right? I
yeah.
mean, they haven't won a conference since they were in the CCHA. So
Yep.
been a long time since we've seen a Michigan State team this good. How about the Gophers? They won big on Saturday.
Yep.
They've won 6 of 7 now.
Yep.
So what have you seen from Minnesota? I mean, like to count Minnesota out at your own peril, right? I mean, that would be a really bad idea given the history and given the talent.
Yeah, I think it's consistency. They're finding it a little more. Bob Motzko was not happy after that loss on Friday. He said, this is a bad loss for the Gophers. He didn't even talk about like in the third person of the team. And you saw it. The guys talked to him before the game Saturday before they called it, and they said he was angry. They said he'd never seen him not smile before a game. So they came in businesslike, and then they brought it on the ice. 5-1 win at Munn. And then they're essentially one bad period in the last 7 games. So, yes, trending the right way. Their young guys are playing better. The guys that came back from World Juniors, you tend to see it all over. They come back with another confidence. Oliver Moore had 2 goals and assists, a first-round pick for the Chicago Blackhawks. He's starting to look like not a freshman anymore. And you get contributions like that, and their defense is better. and you got Justin Close back there with a great story. They're trending up and coming. Whether they finish in the top place, I don't think it'll matter, but if they're playing the right way come March, that's what Bob Motzko wants.
Got Wisconsin coming up this weekend. We'll talk about that series here in a bit. Michigan and Wisconsin split, but I think it's fair to say, like kind of along the lines of what you were talking about, like, hey, 5 of the 6 periods, Minnesota was the better team. It certainly felt like Michigan was the better team this weekend. I mean, they scored 10 goals in 2 games on Wisconsin. We've talked about how much Wisconsin has, how poorly
defensively they've been great
against them, right? And how impervious they've been to great offenses. They weren't in this game. So, was this a blip? You think? Was there a crack in the foundation there for Wisconsin's defense? Because that's what's gotten them to this point, as we talked about.
It's hard to say because you're playing against a team, and I'm going to get to this in a second when you ask me about Michigan, but they're offense is so dynamic.
Right.
In every way, they get you mesmerized into playing the way they want to play, which is up and down the ice. But what I liked about Wisconsin after losing Friday, pretty convincingly, it wasn't really a game, 5-1. The next game, Michigan scored right off the bat, and you're like, here we go again.
Right.
But they were able to answer back. And then when it got to the third period in a 5-5 game, Kyle McClellan came through at the end, which shows okay, he had a rough couple games, but he answered the bell at the big time late in the game, got the game to overtime, and got the win. So both of these series very similar in terms of the top team were they the favorite or not the favorite with Michigan State and then Wisconsin in this series? Because you feel like Minnesota and Michigan are coming, and you saw lots of examples of that.
I do think you kind of get stuck in that historic rut, right? It's weird based on what we've seen in recent years to have a Michigan-Wisconsin series and think, okay, well, Wisconsin's a favorite, just based on what we've seen. And same thing with Michigan State and Minnesota, just given the dominance we've seen there. Okay, what about next weekend? Minnesota-Wisconsin. Going to be a great series. How important is this series for each one of these teams?
Well, it's the big rivalry. The Kohl Center is going to be rocking. I think they're close to sellouts for both nights. So, it's kind of what they've had for decades there. You wanted to see this, and you want to see the big rivalries. You want to see Michigan State good. So these games mean a lot, not just for the rivalry, but for the standings and for all that's attached. I think you got 2 different teams. I think Wisconsin's going to want to tighten it back up, right? They want to play that 2-1 game. Wisconsin wants to get going a little more. So I think
Minnesota does.
Or Minnesota, excuse me.
Right,
Minnesota wants to get going, and they've scored a lot of goals. They went into Michigan State and scored, 8-9 goals. So they're very confident right now. Is Wisconsin? I think they're going to get home and feel a little better about themselves and play with a little more confidence in their type of game. So this is huge I think it's a mental thing for Wisconsin to get over the hump. They did sweep Minnesota at Minnesota.
Seems
so Minnesota
like a year ago, doesn't it? That's a long time. October. It was October.
It was pretty much making their statement that they're here.
Right.
And so that was pretty cool actually to see. And you saw that kind of gain their confidence. I think Minnesota's going to have a big chip on their shoulder going into Cole and try to kind of do the same thing.
What about Michigan State? They go on the road to Notre Dame. How tough a challenge is this for the first-place Spartans?
Oh, it's huge. It's a tough challenge because I think Notre Dame just had a week off. They're going to be rested. And this is huge for Notre Dame. Right now, they're right in the middle of the Big Ten standings. They're right underneath the pairwise. They're in 20th spot for the NCAA. If they want to get to where they want to go, they need a sweep. They need to go. They have 8 games left. They need to win at least 5. If you can go and sweep Michigan State, that's going to be big. So it's going to be tough for Michigan State to answer the bell there.
In 30 seconds, we know how tough things are in Columbus. Michigan's there this weekend. You're going to be there this weekend. Just give us a quick pitch on that.
Yeah, my alma mater's had a rough year, but they compete. They will compete hard. If they can keep the game within a goal, they got a chance. But Michigan's offense is ridiculous. They have 6 guys over 30 points already. Put that into context. There's only one other player in the Big Ten that has over 30 points, Aiden Fink at Penn State.
And they have 6?
They have 6. No other. Denver has 4. BC, Boston College has 3. Michigan has 6 guys over 30 points, and we're not even in February yet.
Wow,
so that's the offensive juggernaut you're facing in Michigan. So if Ohio State can keep it close, they played well at home, they can kind of compete, but we'll see.
7th Big Ten series for the Wolverines, yet to sweep one. We'll see whether or not they
need it.
They get that sweep against the Buckeyes. And again, Cappy will be on the call there. Best games on the Big Ten slate this week. We got a huge one for Ohio State tomorrow. They will be hosting Illinois. Two good ones for Purdue. Northwestern at home Wednesday. It's a Big Ten Network game. Then they go to Madison Sunday. Two top teams in the conference there. Badgers on the road against Nebraska Thursday, so that does not figure to be easy either. I don't want to in any way imply that we think that Wisconsin-Nebraska game is a surefire win or that the Purdue-Northwestern game is a surefire win for either of those top teams. Right. That being said, I do think kind of like the big game, obviously based on rankings and whatnot, is Purdue-Wisconsin this weekend. So we only have a little bit of time left. Let's focus on that game. Again, making no assumptions about what happens previous, but what does Purdue need to do? What does Wisconsin need to do to win the game?
Purdue's perimeter is going to need to lock in defensively. You look at Wisconsin this season, there is nowhere you can hide a guy. You're going to have to guard each one of those guys, and Lance Jones can't guard them all for Purdue. You look at A.J. Storr, that's probably going to be a matchup for Lance Jones, being able to contain him, contest those jumpers, being a smaller defender. But Fletcher Lawyer, this is a game where he has to prove himself defensively, guarding Max Klesmit, because if you lack defensively on Max Klesmit, he can get you for 15, 20 points on any given night.
The thing that worries me from Wisconsin's point of view is, like, if you were to look at one deficiency for their team, it's guarding the interior.
Yep.
And that's really not a great place to be yes. when you're playing Purdue, right?
Yes.
Like, how do you overcome that?
You rebound the basketball. You don't give them second chance opportunities to score the ball again. But then on the perimeter, Max Klesmit, Chucky Hepburn, push that initial catch from Purdue's offense outside that three-point line and make that post feed harder.
Make the entry feed tougher, right?
Yep.
Make them work to get the ball to that spot where you struggle. All right, great stuff. We will see you next time on Big Ten.